Reddit, what are the craziest declassified CIA documents? The pardon of the Japanese who ran Unit 731 in exchange for their findings. They performed countless experiments on live human POWs, cutting off limbs to test blood loss, injecting them with diseases and seeing how they progressed when left untreated, the vivisection of these same individuals, and other really fucking disgusting stuff that I don't have the stomach to type out. You can Google the rest. The US government felt it was more important to have that information in American hands than to let it go to the Russians, or be lost. You'd never be able to conduct those kind of experiments again, and for good reason, so they considered it the lesser of two evils. A fairly prominent Nazi scientist, can't remember the name, not inclined to look it up right before bed, wrote to his boss, Dr. Joseph Mengele, and got him to write to Hitler to tell the Japanese to stop their unethical human experimentation. Joseph F. Mengele was concerned with Unit 731's ethics. It's that bad. Psychological warfare in the Philippines in the 1950s comes to mind. The CIA conducted research to figure out which sort of myths and superstitions the Philippine people had. They discovered that they were afraid of vampires. At one point they disrupted a group by snatching a local man, murdering him, and putting teeth marks on his neck. They then hung him upside down for his friends to find, which terrified the village. This was all part of an effort to elect Ramon Magsaysay as president, who basically acted as a puppet for the US. The CIA wrote his speeches and directed his policy. It wasn't just a villager, it was a fighter with a communist insurgent group known as the Huks. The story comes from a guy named Ed Lansdale who ran the operation. The Psywar squad set up an ambush along the trail used by the Huks. When a Huk patrol came along the trail, the ambushers silently snatched the last man of the patrol, their move unseen in the dark night. They punctured his neck with 2 holes, vampire fashion, held the body up by the heels, drained it of blood, and put the corpse back on the trail. When the Huks returned to look for the missing man and found their bloodless comrade, every member of the patrol believed that the Ajuang, vampire, had got him and that one of them would be next if they remained on that hill. When daylight came, the whole Huk squadron moved out of the vicinity. The Pentagon Papers, which were leaked, not outright declassified, and the resultant Church Committee report. These are what made public the CIA's actions in overthrowing governments and instigating/assisting coups all over the world for decades leading up to the 70s. Pretty much every negative stereotype of the CIA we have today was created or informed by the Pentagon Papers and Church Committee report. All the failed assassination attempts against Fidel Castro. According to Fabian Escalante, who worked for the Cuban counterintelligence, there were 638 of them. Here are some highlights. In 1960 they tried to poison his cigars. They asked the Chicago mob for help and they said poison pills are the best. The mobsters hired a local assassin, who gave them to ice cream/milkshake parlor employee who was supposed to slip them into Castro's ice cream. When he tried to get the poison pills from the freezer, they were frozen solid on the coils of the freezer. They planned to put explosives under a painted seashell, as Castro loved to go scuba diving and collect seashells. The plan was discarded as impractical. In the same year they contaminated a scuba diving suit for Castro with a fungus that should give Castro a deadly disease. The person tasked with this, American lawyer James Donovan, who was negotiating the release of hostages after the Bay of Pigs invasion, couldn't do it in the end. They trained his lover to poison him, but she got cold feet. They had a James Bond-like idea of poisoning him with a tiny needle attached to a ballpoint pen. The government official who was supposed to stab him with that needle threw the pen away, as he was too afraid that the needle might accidentally poison him instead. Last but not least, they had the idea to assassinate his character by spraying LSD-like chemical into the broadcasting studio where he held his speeches. The idea was to make him look confused and unfit to rule. The plan was abandoned as the chemical was unreliable. Operation Sea Spray, a 1950 U.S. Navy secret biological warfare experiment in which Serratia marcescens and Bacillus globigii bacteria were sprayed over the San Francisco Bay Area in California, in order to determine how vulnerable a city like San Francisco may be to a bioweapon attack. Between 1949 and 1969, open-air tests of biological agents were conducted 239 times. In 80 of those experiments, the Army said it used live bacteria that its researchers at the time thought were harmless. Not so. Fun fact. S. marcescens is what causes the pinkish grime in showers/bathrooms. I had a family member who had a nasty UTI after catheterization for giving birth, and after a few failed rounds of antibiotics, they finally did a proper culture and antibiotic screen to reveal S. marcescens and the correct drug to use. Antibiotic resistance is a scary thing. And it's only getting worse. Operation Northwoods, a false flag operation meant to be conducted with the assistance of the Department of Defense in order to commit terrorist attacks on the US population and blame the whole thing on Cuba so that America would support war on Cuba. The killing of Patrice Lumumba is up there. Finally, an African leader who wasn't just in it to enrich himself, and bam, the CIA orders his execution because clearly someone not overcome by selfish greed must be a Soviet looking to point nukes at the US. Well, Patrice Lumumba was one of the best hopes a post-colonial Africa had of a Pan-Africa movement. The Congo is where all the rubber comes from, along with countless rare earth minerals, and right nearby it, the uranium. Lumumba was planning to nationalize or at least exert greater control over those resources for the benefit of a unified African state, powered by nuclear energy and nuclear wealthy and natural resources. Of course that stuff wasn't going to be allowed, but during the 60s, the CIA noticed that artists tend to lean towards socialism and communism. They realized the best way to prevent this or discredit these political positions was to make them wealthy so they would be more invested in capitalism. To do this, the CIA would anonymously buy modern art pieces, no matter how nonsensical, for very high prices. This made the otherwise highly niche and difficult to access modern art genre a chic, fashionable and highly profitable genre, and basically prevented prominent members of the art community from turning to socialism or communism by converting them to wealthy members of the upper class. TLDR, the spolied novo riche avant-garde airhead artist stereotype was literally created by the CIA dumping money into prominent figures' pockets and allowing them to discredit their political activism by becoming self-indulgent parodies of themselves. 100% the gateway experience. Like, this shit is fucking bonkers. Declassified doc from 1983 detailing the CIA's usage of harmonic resonance to gain access to the astral plane. It describes how the CIA used astral projection to create force fields around military bases, visit the future, and even talk to literal God. They call God the Absolute, which they claim is all of the universe compiled into a single point for a single moment in time, after which the universe re-expands. Seriously, read this shit if you have a mind for the creepy/unexplained. The simple sabotage field menu made by the Office of Strategic Services, which was the CIA before they were given the name. A guide on how to do simple sabotage in the USSR. Funny enough, their guide on how managers can sabotage work sounds a lot like how much companies work today. 1. Demand written orders. 2. Misunderstand orders. Ask endless questions or engage in long correspondence about such orders. Quibble over them when you can. 3. Do everything possible to delay the delivery of orders. Even though parts of an order may be ready beforehand, don't deliver it until it is completely ready. 4. Don't order new working materials until your current stocks have been virtually exhausted, so that the slightest delay in filling your order will mean a shutdown. 5. Order high-quality materials which are hard to get. If you don't get them, argue about it. Warn that inferior materials will mean inferior work. 6. In making work assignments, always sign out the unimportant jobs first. See that the important jobs are assigned to inefficient workers of poor machines. 7. Insist on perfect work in relatively unimportant products. Send back for refinishing those which have the least flaw. Approve other defective parts whose flaws are not visible to the naked eye. 8. Make mistakes in routing so that parts and materials will be sent to the wrong place in the plant. 9. When training new workers, give incomplete or misleading instructions. 10. To lower morale and with it, production, be pleasant to inefficient workers. Give undeserved promotions. Discriminate against efficient workers. Complain unjustly about their work. 11. Hold conferences when there is more critical work to be done. It's an interesting read, but if you want to read more on the office side, it starts on page 28 in the scan booklet, or page 18 of the PDF. Project Paperclip, taking former Nazi scientists from Germany to America to hopefully beat the Soviets in the space race. Pretty much every adult in Germany during World War II was technically a member of the Nazi Party. Most of the Operation Paperclip guys were just scientists and engineers. Of the 1,600-ish people brought to the US, only about a dozen were ever suspected of war crimes. Only one was ever tried, and found not guilty. To be fair, some were absolute Nazi bastards who got their crimes swept under the rug, but were also too brilliant to let them go to the Russians. The Soviets were absolutely attempting to do the same thing. Many of the German scientists were deathly afraid of what the Soviets might do to them, basically enslaving them. Operation Paperclip turned into a weird mix of a rescue operation and a kidnapping operation. Project Azorian was a CIA operation to retrieve the remains of the Soviet Golf-class ballistic missile submarine K-129. It sank in the North Pacific while on patrol, resting on the seafloor about 3 miles down. The CIA and DoD believed that a salvage operation had the potential to retrieve nuclear SLBMs, nuclear torpedoes, code books and cryptographic gear from the wreck. But the Soviets often patrolled the spot to prevent the Americans from doing exactly that. The CIA was ordered by Henry Kissinger to collaborate with Howard Hughes to set up a FLA's-flagged deep-sea mining concern, which involved the construction of a huge purpose-built ship called the USNS Hughes Glomar Explorer. It had the outward appearance of a deep-sea mining vessel, but concealed inside was an enormous moon pool with a giant claw that would be lowered down to grab the wreck and pull it up to the surface. Allegedly, they did snag the wreck, but the claw suffered a malfunction halfway up, causing a portion of the hull to fall back down to the seafloor. The details of the portion of the hull that was actually recovered and what exactly was found have never been officially disclosed. Kissinger authorized a second attempt, but before that could be effected, the LA Times broke a story about the operation, allegedly sourced from a memo that was part of a cache of documents that was stolen from a Hughes office some months prior. The operation now being fully blown, the Soviet Navy stationed destroyers at the spot to prevent the Americans from trying again, and Kissinger finally nixed any plans for further attempts. The Wikipedia article on this operation hints that allegedly the front part of the hull was recovered, including 2 intact nuclear torpedoes and the sonar dome, and that the part of the hull containing the nuclear-tipped missiles, code books and cryptographic gear was lost due to the claw malfunction. It also hints that the claw malfunction story may have been a fabrication, and that all of the sought-after sensitive material had been recovered and covered up, presumably to preserve their advantage thus gained from its study. The remains of 6 Soviet submariners were also recovered and given a burial at sea in accordance with military convention. There are plenty of answers here that rely on scale for the definition of worst, but I'd say the qualitatively worst thing the CIA did was fund MKUltra experiments in Canada. Mental patients were locked in isolation, deprived of sensory stimuli and made to listen to recordings on a loop for weeks on end. Unfortunately, the only documents we got from it are from an off-site storage space that the officials in the CIA forgot about, but these are some of the studies they did. Some subjects were given electroshock treatment so powerful they lost all episodic memory of their lives and became the mental equivalent of children. Some of these experiments were paired with psychedelics. Another one that comes to mind is this one. Imagine losing all your memory, tripping balls while being forced to listen to a recording say you're a good wife and mother on loop for multiple consecutive weeks. Now consider what that experience would be like if it were literally the only thing you could remember. That's one of the worst things I could possibly imagine. The Unabomber was an MKUltra test subject as well. Het wasn't drugged. He was told to write down his most deeply held beliefs, submit them, and was then subjected to hours of belittlement and interrogation. To elaborate on this, every couple of weeks they brought him back in and repeated the abuse. Radiolab had an episode on it. Mocked, ridiculed, and shat on his dreams, aspirations, beliefs, and overall on every fiber of his being. Over and over. Everybody in the study that was later questioned, if I recall correctly 19 total, all said that it was the most traumatic thing that ever happened to them. VTW, they used a professional, CIA, interrogator, the guy whose job was to make you feel like a piece of scum of the earth, less than a piece of shit, the same guy that they used to break hardened soldiers/terrorists. Yeah, they used the guy on a couple of college freshmen,